The courthouse sat quietly in the heart of the small town, a sturdy brick building that had stood for decades, its tall windows glinting in the early morning sunlight. Inside, the polished wooden floors reflected the soft glow of the light filtering through dusty panes, giving the room a serene, almost sacred air. The morning was calm, deceptively ordinary, with the faint hum of conversations and the subtle shuffle of papers marking the start of what most expected to be a routine hearing. Lawyers straightened ties and adjusted skirts, their eyes scanning notes and files as if preparing for an uneventful day. Journalists murmured quietly to each other, their pens hovering over notepads, ready to capture facts that would likely be mundane, factual, and procedural. Emma sat on her mother's lap, a tiny bundle of nervous energy. At 3 years old, she was both aware and oblivious, oscillating between curiosity and fatigue, her wide brown eyes darting around the courtroom like a tiny bird flitting nervously in a cage. Her mother held her firmly, whispering soft reassurances. "It's okay, sweetie. Just sit with Mommy," she murmured, stroking Emma's soft hair. Emma nodded, though the gesture was more reflex than comprehension. She fidgeted, turning her small head to glance at the imposing figures around her. The stern judge, the polished lawyers, the police officers with their rigid postures, and the quiet, dignified spectators who filled the benches with anticipatory silence. The atmosphere was heavy with a kind of low expectation, a collective assumption that today would pass like any other courtroom session. Yet beneath that calm, a subtle tension thrummed, like an undertone that went unnoticed but shaped every action. Emma's gaze fell on the police dog seated near its handler, a large, alert German shepherd named Rex. The dog's posture was rigid, disciplined, yet there was an almost imperceptible gentleness in its eyes. The handler knelt beside him, whispering calm instructions as Rex's ears twitched, detecting the faintest movements in the room. Emma's attention, once wandering to the ornate ceiling and the sun-bleached walls, now anchored on Rex. She pointed at him with her tiny finger, a deliberate, almost commanding motion that drew the faintest stir of curiosity from. "Emma, honey," whispered, tightening her hold. But the child's gaze did not waver. It sharpened, intense and focused. There was something about the dog that called to her instincts in a way no one present could understand. Outside the courtroom, the town moved along its usual rhythm. The morning sun touched the rooftops of shops lining Main Street. Birds chirped in a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the tense quiet within the courthouse. Officers stationed outside remained vigilant, their eyes scanning for disturbances, oblivious to the extraordinary moment quietly unfolding inside. The case scheduled for that morning was, by all appearances, an ordinary one, a petty theft at a neighborhood convenience store. Yet, as often happens, the ordinary can be deceiving. Inside, the judge, a man named Henry, reviewed a stack of papers on his desk. His gavel rested lightly at his side, a tool he had wielded countless times to maintain order and ensure fairness. He glanced up occasionally at the gallery, his gaze measured, cautious, expecting nothing beyond the routine. The lawyers, both prosecution and defense, were similarly immersed in preparation, their fingers drumming lightly on folders, eyes flicking between notes and witnesses. Emma's mother, sensing a growing curiosity in her daughter, whispered quietly, "Sweetheart, just stay with me. No talking, okay?" Emma nodded once, but her eyes never left the dog. There was an unusual intensity there, a silent communication that seemed almost impossible for a child of 3 to comprehend fully. And yet, Emma's small body was taut with the certainty of recognition, as if she knew something crucial that the adults in the room could not yet see. The courtroom clerk called the session to order, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "All rise," she announced, and the crowd, Emma's mother shifted, adjusting her daughter on her lap. The rustle of chairs and footsteps filled the brief pause before everyone resumed their seats. The gavel tapped once, twice, and the hearing began. Witnesses were called, statements were read, and the case appeared to proceed along predictable lines. A theft, a single suspect, a series of testimonies that seemed straightforward and procedural. But as the prosecution recounted the events of the previous week, Emma's eyes remained fixed. There was a shift in the room's energy, subtle but undeniable. Those who noticed it felt a ripple pass through the air, a sense that something unexpected was about to occur. Emma's finger twitched slightly, pointing with the kind of precision that suggested awareness, judgment, and understanding beyond her years. The dog Rex responded imperceptibly, a slight tilt of the head, a subtle shift in posture as if he too sensed significance. Noticed her daughter's intensity and felt a shiver of unease. "Emma, honey," she whispered, soft but urgent, a plea for compliance from a child who could not fully understand the stakes. Emma leaned forward slightly, her finger extending with quiet insistence. The murmurs of curiosity began to circulate, small but growing in momentum. Spectators and lawyers noticed, pausing mid-sentence to glance at the child, wondering what prompted this sudden focus. Journalists raised eyebrows, pens poised above paper, capturing the moment for their notebooks. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation, every heartbeat in the room amplified by the quiet attention of a child whose voice had not yet spoken. Emma's tiny lips parted slightly, a prelude to the extraordinary. The tension, barely noticeable at first, coalesced into a charged silence. Even the judge, experienced in countless courtroom dramas, leaned forward with subtle intrigue, sensing that this ordinary morning might be about to fracture into something wholly unexpected. Rex remained calm yet alert, the epitome of trained discipline. His eyes flicked from Emma to the handler, then back again. It was a delicate balance, the instinct of a child, the training of a dog, and the unaware attention of a room full of adults all converging in the quiet stillness of the courthouse. Emma's finger wavered slightly, then steadied, her expression one of concentrated determination. "Emma," her mother whispered again, gently but firmly, a final plea for compliance with a reality she could not yet grasp. Emma's gaze did not waver. Something had captured her attention entirely, an invisible thread connecting her to the dog, to the moment, and perhaps to truth itself. And in that unassuming courthouse, under sunlight and polished wood, the ordinary was on the cusp of becoming unforgettable. The minutes ticked slowly, each second stretching with the tension of anticipation. Lawyers adjusted their papers, witnesses shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and officers exchanged quick glances. Emma's tiny figure, seated on her mother's lap, seemed to anchor the room in a way no adult presence could. The courtroom's rhythm, once predictable, had changed. Everyone felt it, though none could yet explain why. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, Emma's small voice cut through the silence with two words that would echo far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The world outside, the routine morning, and the case itself were about to be irrevocably altered by a 3-year-old child and the quiet, disciplined presence of a police dog named Rex. The judge's gavel rapped lightly, calling the courtroom to attention. The clerk's voice followed, echoing through the high-ceilinged room. "All rise." Lawyers, spectators, and officers, but Emma remained seated on her mother's lap, her wide eyes still locked on the police dog. The sunlight glinting off polished floors fell across her small hands, nervously clutching the hem of her mother's dress. Adjusted her daughter carefully, whispering, "Stay calm, honey," though her own pulse had quickened. Something about Emma's intense focus made the mother uneasy. It was as if the child could sense the weight of events before any adult could. The case itself seemed ordinary on paper. A theft at a neighborhood convenience store, involving a missing purse and a panicked shopkeeper's hurried report. The accused, a man named Daniel Reed, had been apprehended after being identified by a single witness, a neighbor who claimed to have seen someone running away. Reed, a quiet man in his 40s, sat at the defense table, shifting uneasily in his chair. His dark eyes darted around the room, nervously following the gaze of the judge and lawyers. He seemed small in the grand courtroom, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the edges of the table. The prosecution opened first, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Morales. Her voice was calm, measured, yet carried an undertone of authority. She laid out the sequence of events. The theft had occurred on a busy Friday afternoon. The witness had seen someone leaving the store hurriedly, and Daniel Reed had been apprehended later that day based on circumstantial evidence. She spoke clearly, pointing occasionally to exhibits and security footage projected on a small screen near the front. The evidence appeared convincing at first glance, routine for any courtroom, a straightforward case of alleged criminal behavior. The defense attorney, an older man named Thomas, rose with a deliberate pace. His hair was streaked with gray, his face lined with experience, and his voice carried a weight of calm authority. "Ladies and," he began, addressing the jury, "we are here today to examine not just what was seen, but what can be truly proven. Our client, Mr. Reed, maintains his innocence, and it is our duty to ensure that facts, not assumptions, guide your judgment." He gestured toward the accused with a practiced hand, his tone careful yet persuasive. The words seemed to settle the courtroom, but there was an undercurrent of unease as eyes flicked toward the little girl on her mother's lap. Emma, however, was entirely focused elsewhere. Her tiny finger remained extended toward Rex, the police dog whose posture shifted subtly in response. The courtroom had noticed the child's attention, some observers exchanging puzzled glances. Lawyers paused mid-sentence occasionally, drawn inexplicably to the small figure of the girl. Reporters scribbled notes quickly, sensing that this was a moment worth recording, though none yet understood why. The adults assumed it was mere curiosity, the fleeting distraction of a toddler in an unusual environment. Yet Emma's eyes held something different: recognition, certainty, and a quiet insistence that something was amiss. Witnesses were called to the stand one by one. The shopkeeper recounted the theft nervously, his voice quivering slightly under cross-examination. "I saw someone run out with a bag," he said, pointing vaguely toward the door. "It happened so fast I'm not entirely sure who it was." His uncertainty rippled through the courtroom. Emma's mother whispered softly to her daughter, "It's okay, honey, just sit." Emma nodded obediently, but her eyes never left the dog. Her intuition, primal and unspoken, seemed to pull her attention toward an unseen truth. Next came the neighbor, the primary witness against Daniel Reed. His account was tentative, marked by hesitation and repeated, "I think" statements. He described seeing a man running, but his memory faltered under questioning. Lawyers pressed for clarity, the tension in the room mounting with every stuttered word. Observers could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down, and Emma's small figure seemed to grow in significance by the second. Each time the man glanced at the courtroom, Emma's gaze locked with the dog, as though both were silently communicating something no adult could yet understand. The police dog handler, Sergeant Daniels, remained at attention, noting Emma's unusual focus. Rex, trained to react only to specific scents and cues, shifted slightly. There was no aggression, no erratic behavior, just alertness, a subtle acknowledgement of the moment. Daniels glanced down at the dog, then at Emma, sensing that something extraordinary was happening, though the adults around him still treated it as coincidence. He had worked with Rex for years and knew the dog's behavior intimately. He knew when something had triggered the animal's attention. And right now, the dog was reacting to Emma's silent direction. The courtroom's energy began to shift imperceptibly. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, the gallery murmured quietly, and the judge's expression became one of mild curiosity mixed with caution. Emma's tiny body was taut with focus, her finger still pointing, her eyes unblinking. Tried to redirect her attention, whispering, "Honey, look at me." But Emma shook her head slightly, insisting silently on her observation. Every adult present could feel the tension in the room increasing, though none knew precisely why. Time seemed to slow as the prosecution called its final witness, a uniformed officer who had initially handled the evidence. He spoke of procedures, chain of custody, and routine investigations, his words formal and measured. Yet every statement he made seemed to intersect with Emma's quiet observation. Each carefully rehearsed fact suddenly felt fragile, uncertain, as if a new variable had entered the equation. The adults began to sense the extraordinary. A 3-year-old child, small and unassuming, whose attention might hold a truth overlooked by all others. His heart raced. She held Emma closer, whispering reassurances that were more for herself than her daughter. "It's okay. Just stay calm," she murmured repeatedly. Emma's focus never wavered. She leaned forward slightly, fingers still pointed, lips pressed together. Observers began to notice the subtle interplay, the calm precision of the dog, the child's unwavering attention, and the nervous reactions of adults who had assumed the case would proceed without incident. A ripple of anticipation spread quietly, tension mingling with awe. The judge called a brief recess to maintain order, giving lawyers, officers, and the gallery a moment to process the developing situation. Observers whispered in hushed tones, glancing at Emma and Rex as if trying to decipher an invisible connection. "It's just a child," one whispered, "but there's something about her." The dog sat obediently, tail low, eyes bright, alert but calm. The quiet resonance of instinct and trained behavior intersected in a way that no one had anticipated. Held her daughter tightly, realizing that Emma's intuition, small and unassuming as it was, had shifted the energy of the entire courtroom. Lawyers reviewed notes with renewed scrutiny, officers exchanged glances, and the judge leaned back in his chair, intrigued by a variable that explanation. Emma's presence, her focus, and her connection to the dog had injected uncertainty into a case that had seemed straightforward. The ordinary had become extraordinary. And as the recess ended and the courtroom prepared to resume, there was a palpable sense that something remarkable was about to unfold. Emma's tiny finger, still pointed, seemed to anchor the room in a moment of unspoken tension. The adults could sense it, the quiet certainty of a child whose instincts had already begun to alter perceptions, challenge assumptions, and unknowingly shape the outcome of a case that no one expected her to influence. In that moment, the seemingly ordinary courthouse, bathed in morning sunlight and polished wood, felt charged with possibility. Every observer, from seasoned lawyers to curious journalists to skeptical officers, sensed that the course of events was no longer predictable. And Emma, oblivious to the enormity of what was about to happen, leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on the dog, ready to speak the words that would shock everyone and change the trajectory of the morning forever. The courtroom settled back into its seats after the brief recess, but the atmosphere had shifted palpably. What had once been a predictable, mundane case now bristled with tension. Observers leaned forward, their attention no longer on the dry details of a theft but on the small, intense figure of a 3-year-old child perched on her mother's lap. Emma's mother adjusted her daughter carefully, whispering, "Stay calm, sweetie." Emma's eyes did not leave the police dog, Rex, whose calm but alert posture mirrored the child's intense focus. Emma's tiny finger trembled slightly as she pointed toward the dog, a deliberate, unwavering motion that drew the eyes of nearly everyone in the courtroom. The prosecution paused mid-sentence, lawyers exchanged subtle glances, and even the judge, a man well-versed in managing courtroom dramas, leaned forward with subtle curiosity. Something about the child's insistence and focus made the adults uneasy, as if a hidden truth was being gestured at without words. The police dog handler, Sergeant Daniels, stepped slightly forward, though he remained careful not to interfere. He watched his dog closely, noting the subtle shift in posture, the almost imperceptible tilt of the ears. Rex was trained to detect scents, to alert only when prompted by specific cues, yet the dog now responded to something invisible, a combination of instinct, observation, and Emma's silent command. The tension in the room grew with every heartbeat, quiet but undeniable. Emma took a shallow breath, her small chest rising and falling in concentration. She leaned slightly forward, lips parted, and then, in a voice that carried far more weight than anyone anticipated, uttered 2 words, "Not him." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, bouncing off the polished wood and high ceilings. Witnesses froze mid-gesture. Lawyers' pens hovered over paper. Reporters' fingers stilled on keyboards. Officers glanced at each other, their brows furrowed in confusion. Even the judge, experienced in decades of trials, could not suppress a flicker of astonishment. The 2 words were simple, unassuming, yet they carried a weight of authority and truth that no adult had yet demonstrated in this case. Instinctively hugged her daughter, whispering reassurances. "It's okay, Emma, sweetie. Good girl," she murmured, her voice a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Emma's tiny eyes remained locked on the dog, unblinking, as if her statement had merely confirmed what she already knew. She did not yet understand the impact of her words, but the courtroom did. A 3-year-old's brief declaration had already disrupted the expectations of every adult present. The murmurs began softly at first. A journalist scribbled furiously in their notebook, capturing the moment as it unfolded. "A child just spoke," whispered another. "Did she just?" The room held its collective breath. Lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, uncertain how to respond. Defense attorney Thomas leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he processed the potential implications. He recognized the significance immediately. A small, precise statement, made by someone incapable of bias, might carry weight the jury could not ignore. The accused man, Daniel Reed, seemed to shrink in his chair, a mixture of disbelief and hope flickering across his face. He had come to the courthouse expecting a routine trial, perhaps a chance to assert his innocence in a straightforward manner, but now he was confronted with something far more extraordinary. A child had altered the room's energy with a single, decisive statement. The weight of adult assumptions began to crumble in the face of innocent observation. Judge Henry called for silence, rapping his gavel lightly. "Order in the courtroom," he intoned, his voice calm but firm. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the small girl who had captured the attention of every adult present. "Explain yourself, young lady," he said gently, though not expecting an elaborate response. Emma's mother held her daughter closer, whispering, "Honey, just tell them what you see." Emma's lips parted again, but she only repeated the same 2 words, her tone steady and unwavering. "Not him." The courtroom reacted instantly. Gasps, murmurs, and whispered speculation filled the air. Officers exchanged incredulous glances. "Did the child just identify?" one whispered to another. Lawyers began to consider the implications for the case. The accused man's expression shifted, a mixture of relief and disbelief crossing his features. The gallery leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. Even seasoned journalists, trained to remain detached, felt a thrill at witnessing an extraordinary moment of instinct and clarity. Sergeant Daniels stepped forward cautiously, addressing the courtroom. "Rex, my dog here, is trained to respond only to specific scents. He alerts when something is detected, nothing else. There's no random behavior." He paused, scanning the room. "I have never seen a child interact with Rex in this manner. This is unusual." The statement heightened the courtroom's attention. Suddenly, a child's observation combined with a trained dog's precision had introduced a variable no one could ignore. The defense attorney, sensing an opportunity, rose. "Ladies and of the jury," he began, his voice firm, "what we just witnessed may seem extraordinary, even improbable, but it is fact. A trained dog reacting only to specific cues has been alerted by a child's focus. This is a critical piece of information. Our client, Mr. Reed, may have been. We must reconsider the evidence through this lens." His words carried weight, amplified by the courtroom's palpable sense of anticipation. The prosecution, too, paused to reassess. Rachel Morales, sharp and focused, frowned slightly, noting the unexpected influence of Emma's statement. She did not dismiss it outright. Instead, she leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "We will need to consider all possibilities," she said carefully. Her tone acknowledged the unanticipated variable, a child whose intuition could redirect the course of a case, challenging adult assumptions and demanding reconsideration of what had seemed settled. Emma's small hand remained pointed at Rex. The dog's ears twitched, his body alert but calm. Sergeant Daniels demonstrated Rex's usual behavior for the court, showing that the dog responded only to trained cues. The demonstration confirmed what the adults suspected but could not yet fully comprehend. The dog's reaction was deliberate, precise, and consistent. And Emma's influence over that response, through her focus and instinctive attention, had provided clarity no adult observation could replicate. The gallery whispered in awe. Observers, from skeptical officers to seasoned reporters, began to feel the weight of a simple truth. Intuition, innocence, and instinct could reveal things overlooked by experience, procedure, and training. Emma's brief words not merely uttered. They had shifted perception, altered assumptions, and brought attention to a critical detail previously ignored. The judge called for another pause, allowing the courtroom to process the unfolding reality. Lawyers conferred quietly, witnesses fidgeted nervously, and jurors exchanged glances loaded with curiosity and uncertainty. Held Emma close, her pulse quickened, marveling at the fact that her daughter's simple observation had captivated an entire courtroom. Emma herself remained focused yet calm, unaware of the power her tiny words had wielded. Daniel Reed exhaled slowly, relief and disbelief mingling in equal measure. He had come to face suspicion, doubt, and judgment, yet here he was, perhaps closer to justice than he had ever imagined. Emma's small voice had intervened in a way no adult could, piercing through the fog of assumption, error, and uncertainty. The courtroom, once routine and orderly, now thrummed with tension and fascination. And in that moment, the ordinary courthouse became extraordinary. Every observer understood, if only instinctively, that this 3-year-old child had altered the course of the day, and perhaps the course of justice itself. 2 words, simple yet profound, had echoed through polished wood and sunlight. Not him. The room held its breath, every adult aware that what followed would require reconsideration, reflection, and perhaps humility. Emma, oblivious to the gravity of her contribution, maintained her focus, pointing with calm certainty at the dog who had, unknowingly, become her partner in revelation. The extraordinary had arrived quietly, without fanfare, through the eyes and voice of a child who simply knew. And the courtroom, filled with skepticism, procedure, and authority, would never forget the moment Emma spoke, 2 words that changed everything. The words hung in the air like an invisible weight. Not him. 2 syllables, spoken by a 3-year-old, had fractured the quiet certainty that had dominated the courtroom for hours. Gasps erupted simultaneously, echoing off the tall windows and polished wood. Witnesses froze mid-sentence, their recollections suddenly uncertain. Journalists instinctively scribbled faster, their pens unable to keep pace with the unfolding drama. Even the judge leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of controlled surprise, but his eyes betrayed incredulity. He had presided over countless cases in his career, yet this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Instinctively clutched Emma closer, whispering, "It's okay, honey, good girl." Her words were meant to comfort, but they barely registered in the midst of the courtroom's chaotic reaction. Emma, for her part, seemed unfazed by the sudden attention. Her tiny finger remained pointed, unwavering, as if the certainty of her statement gave her a quiet authority that no one could question. She had no understanding of legal proceedings, the weight of evidence, or the intricacies of courtroom procedure. Yet somehow, her simple declaration had forced every adult in the room to reconsider everything they thought they knew. Lawyers paused mid-argument, papers trembling slightly in their hands. Defense attorney Thomas, recognizing the opportunity immediately, leaned forward. "Ladies and of the jury," he said, his voice steady but charged with newfound conviction, "what you have just witnessed may seem improbable, even extraordinary, but it is fact. A trained police dog, whose behavior is precise and controlled, has responded to a child's observation. This is not imagination. This is reality, and it demands reconsideration of the evidence presented thus far." His words struck a chord, rippling through the gallery and jurors alike. The accused, Daniel Reed, sat motionless, eyes wide, the tension etched on his face. Relief mingled with disbelief. A tiny, seemingly inconsequential voice had now intervened on his behalf, potentially averting a grave injustice. He glanced at the defense table, where his confident posture contrasted sharply with the shaky, uncertain demeanor of the prosecution. It was a moment of surreal reversal. A child had become the fulcrum upon which the balance of justice teetered. The prosecution, Rachel Morales, straightened, her mind racing. She had anticipated a routine hearing, clear-cut evidence, and predictable arguments. Now she faced an unanticipated variable, a toddler whose instinctive observation had shifted the focus of the courtroom. "We will, of course, review all circumstances," she said carefully, her tone controlled but deliberate. Every word was measured, a delicate acknowledgement that while children were not typically considered witnesses, extraordinary moments sometimes required extraordinary consideration. She gestured towards Sergeant Daniels and Rex. "Let us also consider the dog's reactions. The facts have taken on new context." Sergeant Daniels, standing near the dog, cleared his throat. His voice was steady, authoritative, yet carried an unmistakable note of awe. "Rex is trained to alert only in the presence of specific scents. He does not react randomly. He does not respond without cause. What you have just witnessed is unprecedented in my experience." The child's attention appears to have prompted a reaction in the dog consistent with detection. This cannot be ignored. The courtroom grew quiet again, absorbing the implications of his words. Jurors shifted in their seats, leaning forward with sudden intensity. Witnesses exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier certainty now tempered by uncertainty. The gallery buzzed softly, a hum of whispers and speculation. Reporters typed furiously, recording every detail, aware that this story would transcend ordinary courtroom reporting. The child's voice had created a ripple that no adult, trained or experienced, could ignore. The ordinary had suddenly become extraordinary, and everyone present was a participant in a moment that would be remembered long after the day ended. Whispered again to her daughter, stroking her hair. "Sweetie, you did great, just stay calm." Emma nodded, serene and focused. Her gaze never wavered from Rex, whose posture remained alert yet controlled. The connection between the child and the dog, invisible yet undeniable, had become the central focus of the courtroom. The adults could see it, sense it, and feel its implications, even if they could not yet articulate them fully. The judge called for a short recess to allow everyone to regain composure and reassess the situation. Lawyers huddled in whispered discussions, officers consulted quietly, and jurors exchanged puzzled looks. Outside the courtroom, the morning sun continued to shine, but inside, time seemed to slow, stretched by the weight of anticipation and the sudden awareness that the case had shifted. The courthouse, previously filled with routine calm, now vibrated with the tension of expectation. During the recess, notice the way people's gazes lingered on Emma. Some whispered among themselves, curious, incredulous, or simply amazed. Even adults trained to dismiss childish input seemed captivated by the clarity of her attention. Emma, oblivious to the spectacle, continued to sit quietly, occasionally shifting her tiny fingers to readjust her grip on her mother's dress. Her small presence had become a focal point, a subtle anchor in a courtroom suddenly charged with uncertainty and possibility. Sergeant Daniels took the opportunity to address a few curious officers near the back of the courtroom. "Rex has never reacted like that before," he said quietly, gesturing toward the dog and Emma. "He responds to scent cues, nothing more. For a child to provoke that reaction, intentionally or not, is something I've never encountered. It's remarkable." The officers nodded slowly, processing what they had witnessed. A trained dog, a child's intuition, and a courtroom full of adults. The combination seemed impossible, yet the evidence of the moment was undeniable. Meanwhile, lawyers from both sides convened quietly, examining notes and previously overlooked details. Thomas, the defense attorney, recognized that Emma's intervention might provide critical leverage. "We need to reconsider the witness statements," he murmured to a colleague. "Every assumption could be flawed. The child's instinct may reveal the truth the adults have missed." Across the room, Rachel Morales did not dismiss the possibility either. She knew the courtroom would need to address this unprecedented development with care, acknowledging its significance without over-reliance on something so unusual. When the recess ended, the courtroom reconvened, and all attention returned to the proceedings. Emma's tiny voice had already become the topic of whispered conversation, speculation, and quiet admiration. Spectators leaned forward, the weight of the moment pressing on every shoulder. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the extraordinary energy of the past hour. Emma, still perched on her mother's lap, remained focused, her finger pointing subtly toward Rex. The dog's calm, alert posture mirrored her certainty. Judge tapped his gavel lightly. "Let us proceed," he said, his tone steady but tinged with curiosity. "We will consider all aspects of this case carefully. The court acknowledges that a unique observation has occurred and may impact the proceedings." He paused, allowing the words to resonate. Lawyers, jurors, and spectators alike understood that the course of the trial was no longer routine. Two simple words from a child had altered the energy, focus, and strategy of every adult present. As witnesses were recalled and evidence, the courtroom seemed to hum with possibility. Each statement was scrutinized anew, each fact reconsidered. Emma's declaration, "not him," had shifted the lens through which everyone viewed the case. The accused man, previously tense and uncertain, began to relax subtly, as if a fragile hope had been reignited. The defense team seized the moment, carefully guiding the jurors' attention toward inconsistencies in earlier testimony and overlooked details. Even the gallery was swept into the unfolding drama. Spectators whispered excitedly, some leaning forward to catch every nuance, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Journalists typed feverishly, capturing the extraordinary interplay of instinct, intuition, and trained skill. Emma, unaware of the magnitude of her impact, maintained her quiet focus, a tiny force of clarity amidst the swirling chaos of adult deliberation. By the time the proceedings resumed in earnest, it was clear. The ordinary courthouse had transformed into a stage for an unprecedented display of insight. A child's instinct, combined with a trained police dog's precision, had become the fulcrum of a case that had once seemed routine. The shock waves of two small words, "not him," were still reverberating, reshaping perceptions, strategies, and expectations in real time. And in that charged, extraordinary courtroom, every adult present understood something fundamental. The truth often emerges in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes, even the smallest voice can alter the course of events beyond imagination. The courtroom had barely regained composure after Emma's two words when a new energy filled the air. Curiosity mingled with disbelief, and the adults began to grapple with the implications of a child's instinct altering the course of legal proceedings. Judge, sensing that ordinary procedure could no longer govern the room, called for the police dog handler, Sergeant Daniels, to provide a demonstration. The entire courtroom leaned forward, jurors, lawyers, and spectators alike, eager to see the precise dynamics that had just transformed the hearing. Emma's mother held her daughter a little, a mixture of pride and apprehension. Sergeant Daniels knelt beside Rex, whispering soft commands to calm the dog. "Rex, focus," he said quietly, and the German shepherd's ears twitched, its body poised and alert, waiting for cues. The officer explained that Rex had been trained to alert only to specific scents connected to criminal activity or objects related to a case. He demonstrated the dog's procedure, having Rex approach a small collection of items on the table, sniffing carefully before signaling to the officer. The courtroom watched in silence as the dog executed each step with precision. Then came the pivotal moment. Emma, still on her mother's lap, extended her finger toward Rex again. Her gaze was unwavering, her tiny chest rising with deliberate breaths, signaling focus that was impossible to ignore. Without consciously understanding what she was doing, Emma had prompted a subtle change in Rex's behavior. The dog's tail twitched slightly, its head tilted toward an object on the evidence table, and Sergeant Daniels nodded quietly. This was the exact kind of reaction that would be expected only if Rex detected a scent he had been trained to recognize. The courtroom murmured in astonishment. Lawyers and officers began to discuss the implications. Defense Attorney Thomas rose first. "Ladies and of the jury," he began, "we have just witnessed something extraordinary. A trained dog responding only to scent cues has been guided, intuitively, instinctively, by a child. This alters our understanding of the evidence. If the dog's reaction is genuine, it introduces reasonable doubt regarding Mr. Reed's involvement in this case. His words were deliberate, designed to focus attention on the potential misidentification and the extraordinary variable introduced by Emma. The prosecution, led by Rachel Morales, paused, reconsidering strategy. "We must, of course, ensure the integrity of all evidence," she said carefully. "However, it is true that this reaction, while unusual, cannot be ignored. We will allow a detailed review of the items and procedures to determine whether the dog's behavior, influenced by the child, alters the conclusions of this investigation." Even Morales, known for her strict adherence to protocol, recognized the unprecedented nature of the moment. Detectives were summoned to the stand to prior assumptions. They examined surveillance footage, revisited witness statements, and reviewed every aspect of the case from the moment of the theft. Subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. The neighbor who had initially identified Daniel Reed had wavered in his recollection, describing the alleged thief in vague, generalized terms. Other witnesses had conflated times and distances, creating a patchwork of testimony that now seemed unreliable. Each discovery underscored the significance of Emma's input, the seemingly small observation that had prompted a comprehensive re-examination. The courtroom seemed to pulse with renewed focus. Observers leaned forward, murmurs hushed but filled with curiosity. Reporters typed rapidly, capturing every nuance, aware that a story of innocence, instinct, and unexpected revelation was unfolding before them. Emma's tiny figure, calm yet insistent, had become the catalyst for a cascade of reassessment, a force of truth operating outside conventional logic. The interplay between her intuition and Rex's trained behavior fascinated everyone present, creating a palpable sense of awe. Whispered softly to Emma, "Sweetie, you're helping so much. Just stay calm, okay?" Emma nodded, her expression serene, entirely focused on the dog. She did not fully comprehend the significance of her observation, but she had sensed something that adults, bound by experience and expectation, had overlooked. In that moment, the smallest human presence was shaping outcomes in ways far beyond what any adult could have predicted. Sergeant Daniels explained the scientific principles underlying Rex's behavior. "Rex is trained to recognize very specific scents associated with criminal evidence," he said. "He alerts only when there is a confirmed match. A false positive is extraordinarily rare. For a child to prompt this behavior indirectly, it is unprecedented. I have worked with Rex for over 6 years, and I've never seen anything like this." The courtroom absorbed this with quiet fascination, understanding that Emma's intuition had not only influenced perception, but had revealed truth in a way logic alone could not achieve. The defense attorney requested a more thorough demonstration. Rex was brought to individual pieces of evidence, each carefully observed by jurors and spectators. The dog reacted consistently to certain objects but remained neutral toward others. Emma's subtle guidance had drawn attention to items previously overlooked, highlighting critical details. Lawyers and investigators began to cross-examine prior procedures, realizing that human error had played a larger role than initially acknowledged. Every movement of Emma's hand and every slight change in Rex's posture had shifted the courtroom's understanding of the case. Witnesses were called back, this time under careful scrutiny. The shopkeeper revisited his description, admitting gaps in memory. The neighbor's testimony, previously taken at face value, was reconsidered in light of the dog's reactions and the child's observation. Detectives the timeline, identifying small but crucial discrepancies. Emma's input, indirect yet decisive, was altering the trajectory of a case that had seemed straightforward. Adults, bound by procedure and protocol, were now following the instincts of a 3-year-old, guided by the subtle cues of a trained police dog. The courtroom energy grew electric with every new discovery. Jurors leaned forward, fully engaged, as if sensing that they were witnessing a rare alignment of innocence, instinct, and trained expertise. Spectators whispered in fascination, acknowledging that something extraordinary had intervened in the ordinary flow of events. Emma, small and serene, remained the epicenter of this transformation, her simple focus drawing attention to what adults had missed. Glanced around, noticing the mix of awe and disbelief on the faces of everyone present. Officers exchanged glances, unsure whether to treat the event as a legal anomaly or a moment of instinctive brilliance. Lawyers conferred in low tones, recalibrating strategy and reconsidering every detail in light of Emma's intervention. Even the judge, who had seen decades of trials, seemed quietly captivated by the alignment of events. A child's observation, a dog's trained behavior, and the human pursuit of truth converging in the same room. Sergeant Daniels continued to explain the science of canine detection, emphasizing the rarity of false positives. Rex is trained to ignore distractions, unrelated scents, and environmental noise, he said. He responds with precision, not guesswork. For a child to focus his attention correctly, even indirectly, and produce consistent results, it is astonishing. We are witnessing something truly exceptional. The courtroom absorbed this, realizing that intuition, innocence, and experience had intersected in a way that demanded reconsideration of all prior conclusions. The gallery remained silent, captivated, as the investigation unfolded before their eyes. Reporters exchanged notes, some whispering that this would become a story remembered for years. Lawyers reviewed each piece of evidence, now filtered through the lens of Emma's input. Even the accused man, Daniel Reed, seemed to relax incrementally, hope flickering across his features. The courtroom, once predictable and routine, had transformed into a theater of revelation, where innocence and instinct reshaped reality. By the time the recess ended, the courtroom had been irrevocably altered. Every participant, jurors, lawyers, witnesses, officers, and spectators, understood that Emma's observation was not a trivial distraction. Her focus, combined with Rex's trained precision, had revealed gaps, inconsistencies, and possibilities that no adult had discerned. A child's intuition had redefined the investigation, forcing everyone to confront the limitations of perception, experience, and human assumption. In that charged, extraordinary atmosphere, Judge called the court to order. "We will proceed with careful consideration of all evidence," he said. "It is clear that recent observations have introduced new factors that must be addressed. Let us continue, mindful that truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources." His words carried authority, but also a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Emma, unaware of the magnitude of her contribution, remained calm and focused, a small figure whose instincts were reshaping the understanding of events. The dog, poised and disciplined, mirrored her attention, creating a subtle but undeniable synergy between intuition and training. The ordinary courthouse had become a stage for a remarkable convergence of insight, perception, and revelation. And as the courtroom prepared to resume the next phase of testimony and evidence, it was clear that the child's two words no longer a fleeting moment. They had become the pivot around which the investigation now turned, reshaping assumptions, clarifying uncertainties, and guiding everyone present toward an unanticipated pursuit of justice. The courtroom had settled into an uneasy silence after the re-examination of evidence and Rex's demonstration. The murmurs of astonishment had faded, replaced by a tangible tension that seemed to vibrate through every wooden bench and polished floor. Jurors leaned forward, their expressions a mix of intrigue and disbelief, while the gallery remained rapt, whispering softly. Lawyers reviewed notes and whispered among themselves, recalibrating strategies in real time. Witnesses fidgeted in their seats, aware that their previous statements were under newfound scrutiny. At the center of this unprecedented shift was a small child, Emma, who sat quietly on her mother's lap, fingers still extended toward the police dog, Rex. Watched her daughter, heart racing. "Sweetie, just stay calm," she whispered, smoothing Emma's hair. The child nodded, serene and focused, as if she understood the weight of her influence without comprehending its full magnitude. Emma's presence had become the fulcrum around which the case now pivoted. The adults, trained in law, procedure, and investigation, were suddenly relying on instinct and a child's intuition to guide them toward the truth. Defense attorney Thomas rose, adjusting his notes with a practiced hand. "Ladies and of the jury," he began, his voice calm yet deliberate, "we have been presented with a unique circumstance. A trained police dog, reacting only to specific cues, has indicated a critical observation, guided by a child's instinct. When we consider the evidence through this lens, discrepancies in witness testimony become clear. It is our duty to reconsider these statements with impartiality and diligence." He allowed his words to settle, the courtroom hanging on his tone, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Rachel Morales, the prosecution, acknowledged the significance of the moment with quiet resolve. "We recognize that extraordinary observations have occurred," she said, her voice measured. "We must now evaluate all evidence anew. Witness statements, video footage, and physical evidence will be, with careful attention to accuracy, reliability, and the role of observation in shaping conclusions." Her words, though carefully chosen, carried an implicit acknowledgement. The trajectory of the case had shifted irreversibly. The first witness recalled to the stand was the neighbor who had initially identified Daniel Reed. Under cross-examination, he appeared nervous, shifting in his seat as the defense attorney guided the jury through inconsistencies in his testimony. "You saw Mr. Reed running from the scene," said calmly, "but can you be certain of the timing and the direction? How confident are you in your memory when distracted or obstructed by passing vehicles?" The witness faltered, his voice uncertain, revealing gaps in recall that had gone unnoticed in the initial proceedings. Next, the shopkeeper was called back. He spoke slowly, carefully reconsidering details in light of the dog's behavior and the child's observation. "It happened so fast," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the door. I thought I saw someone, but I'm not certain. There were other people, shadows, movement. It's possible I made a mistake." Every word, tentative and faltering, reinforced the growing realization that human memory, flawed and imprecise, had misled the investigation. Emma's quiet observation had uncovered these overlooked vulnerabilities. Sergeant Daniels and Rex were brought forward once again to demonstrate the dog's method. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, keenly aware that the dog's reactions, guided indirectly by Emma, might resolve lingering uncertainty. Rex approached the evidence methodically, sniffing each item. When Emma subtly pointed, the dog's posture shifted, tail twitching slightly, head tilting toward a small handbag placed on the table. Daniels nodded quietly. This was the cue indicating a scent associated with the theft, and it matched items that had not been closely examined previously. The courtroom murmured in astonishment. Lawyers for both sides conferred briefly before addressing the jury once more, highlighted the discrepancies, connecting the dots between the dog's behavior and the witness statements. Morales emphasized the need for careful consideration, acknowledging that the new information required thoughtful analysis. The jurors, attentive and engaged, appeared to understand that the combination of instinct and trained observation had introduced a level of precision previously absent. They were no longer merely reviewing testimony. They were interpreting a nuanced convergence of insight and evidence. Daniel Reed, previously tense and uncertain, now exhaled slowly, hope flickering in his eyes. He had faced suspicion and looming consequences for what he insisted was not his fault. Now, the courtroom had been transformed, the focus recalibrated by a child's intuition and a dog's trained reactions. Each carefully observed movement, each subtle shift in Rex's posture, reinforced the possibility that the accused man had been. The weight of expectation on the jurors was profound. They were being asked to weigh both conventional evidence and the extraordinary interplay of instinct and training. Emma, blissfully unaware of her influence, remained calm and serene. Her finger, pointed gently toward Rex, had become the axis upon which the investigation turned. Every adult present recognized that her observation, though small, had reshaped the proceedings in ways that logic alone could not explain. Her words, "not him," had ignited a process of reevaluation, prompting witnesses to reconsider statements, detectives to reassess timelines, and lawyers to adjust strategies. The gallery watched in awe as the process unfolded. Whispered speculations spread quietly, acknowledging that a child had exerted a profound effect on legal proceedings. Reporters captured every detail with a sense of urgency, aware that the story would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The courtroom itself, once merely a venue for procedural matters, had become a theater of revelation. Emma's observation had revealed gaps in human memory, inconsistencies in testimony, and potential errors in identification, all while remaining unassuming and calm. The judge, recognizing the gravity of the moment, addressed the court. "We are proceeding under extraordinary circumstances," he said, his voice measured but firm. "All parties are to ensure that every observation, every piece of evidence, and every testimony is scrutinized thoroughly. We are witnessing the emergence of insight from an unexpected source, and it must be considered carefully." His acknowledgement carried weight, signaling that the ordinary rules of procedure now operated alongside an unprecedented variable, a child's intuition. Witnesses were recalled in sequence, each questioned with renewed rigor. Minor inconsistencies emerged repeatedly, reinforcing the necessity of assumptions. Emma's simple statement had created a lens through which every fact could be, and it became apparent that prior conclusions were less reliable than initially assumed. The courtroom was in a state of heightened awareness, participants absorbing the profound implications of a child's perception intersecting with trained canine detection and human observation. As the trial progressed, a subtle yet profound shift occurred. The jurors, once passive recipients of testimony, were now active interpreters of nuanced signals, interpreters of instinct as much as fact. The prosecution and defense, forced to adapt, demonstrated a rare unity of purpose. Both sides acknowledged that justice demanded careful attention to every variable, no matter how unconventional. In the center of this evolving dynamic sat Emma, a silent but undeniable force of clarity. By mid-morning, the momentum of the case had shifted. Daniel Reed, who had previously sat tense and apprehensive, now appeared steadier. Hope had replaced fear, fueled by the realization that truth could emerge in forms unexpected and extraordinary. Witnesses provided amended statements, the dog's reaction had been confirmed and replicated, and investigators noted critical details previously overlooked. Emma's influence, though subtle and unconscious, had reshaped the trajectory of the trial. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight continued to filter through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across polished floors. Inside, every participant sensed the transformation taking place. What had begun as a routine hearing had become a complex interplay of intuition, observation, and trained skill. Emma's simple declaration, "not him," had ignited a process that forced adults to question assumptions, evidence, and confront the limits of human perception. By the end of the day's proceedings, it was clear. The case had turned. Emma's input had catalyzed a shift in perspective, prompting careful analysis and deeper investigation. The courtroom had been transformed from a space of routine procedure into a theater of revelation, where innocence, instinct, and expertise converged in an extraordinary dance of truth-seeking. The extraordinary influence of a small child and a trained dog had rewritten expectations, reshaping the path to justice in ways no one could have anticipated. In that charged, remarkable atmosphere, the courtroom collectively recognized something profound. Truth is not always revealed through procedure alone, nor is it bound by experience or authority. Sometimes, it emerges through the smallest of voices, guided by instinct and perception. Emma's two words, uttered calmly and confidently, had illuminated a path toward clarity, bridging the gap between human error and the pursuit of justice. And in doing so, she had altered the course of the trial, leaving a lasting mark on every observer, participant, and witness in the room. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation, every seat filled, every eye focused on the center stage of justice. The day had stretched long, yet no one wanted to leave. The ordinary rhythm of the trial had been upended by extraordinary circumstances: a 3-year-old child, a police dog, and 2 simple words: not him. Now all parties awaited the moment that would resolve months of uncertainty and a lifetime of tension for Daniel Reed. The jurors, huddled in their deliberation room for hours, had pored over every detail: witness statements, surveillance footage, physical evidence, and the dog's precise reaction, guided by Emma's subtle cues. Sat rigidly in the gallery, her heart thumping so loudly she feared the child would hear it. Emma, small and serene, rested quietly on her mother's lap, still observing Rex with a quiet intensity. The little girl seemed to embody a calm that contrasted sharply with the courtroom's collective anxiety. Adults whispered softly among themselves, casting glances at the toddler whose instinctive observation had upended the case. Every person present understood that the child's intuition had become a decisive factor, an invisible yet undeniable thread woven into the fabric of truth. Daniel Reed sat at the defense table, fingers clenched around the edges of the polished wood. His dark eyes, tired and apprehensive from hours of waiting, now held a cautious hope. He had faced months of suspicion, the looming weight of accusation pressing down like a storm cloud, but the extraordinary events of the trial had shifted the scales. The dog's reactions, corroborated by Emma's focus, had exposed flaws in witness testimony and highlighted inconsistencies in the timeline. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future in which his name would be cleared. Judge, a man of decades-long experience in law and procedure, rose slowly, tapping the gavel lightly. The sound echoed through the courtroom, drawing every gaze forward. "Members of the jury," he said, voice measured and solemn, "the court has heard testimony, reviewed evidence, and observed extraordinary developments during these proceedings. Your deliberations have considered all variables, including recent observations that fall outside conventional procedure. We will now hear your verdict." Every word carried weight, every pause stretching the tension across the room like taut wire. The jurors filed in one by one, faces neutral but unreadable. The courtroom fell into a tense silence, as if collective breath had been held for hours. Each juror carried with them the responsibility of discerning truth from ambiguity, guided not only by conventional evidence, but by the subtle indications brought forth by Emma and Rex. The convergence of instinct and trained observation had become integral to their decision-making, reshaping how they viewed reliability, accuracy, and human perception. The foreperson stood, clasping hands nervously. "Your Honor, the jury has reached a verdict," she announced. Her voice was steady, yet the weight of the moment resonated throughout the room. Silence deepened, punctuated only by the faint shuffle of papers and the soft breathing of spectators. Emma's small hand gripped her mother's dress, still calm, as if she sensed that her 2 words had finally reached their culmination. "On the charge of theft," the foreperson continued, "we, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Reed." A pause. The courtroom held its collective breath. "Not guilty." A ripple of shock and relief surged through the courtroom. Gasped, clenching Emma to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. Emma looked up at her mother, expression calm and untroubled, unaware that her brief declaration had carried the weight of justice. Daniel Reed exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing, a weight lifted from his chest that had threatened to crush him for months. Hope, fragile and long-awaited, now into reality. The defense table erupted quietly into hugs and handshakes, but the courtroom maintained a controlled energy. Even the prosecution acknowledged the outcome with professional composure, though subtle relief flickered across Rachel Morale's face. The extraordinary circumstances, the child's observation, the dog's trained precision, and the careful reevaluation of evidence had converged to achieve justice in a case that initially seemed straightforward but had been clouded by error and assumption. Sergeant Daniels approached cautiously, kneeling beside Rex. "Good work, boy," he whispered, patting the dog's head. The German shepherd remained calm, ears alert, as if aware of the importance of the moment without celebrating it. Rex's trained behavior had played a subtle yet decisive role, guiding attention to details overlooked by human perception. Adults acknowledged the synergy between intuition and expertise, recognizing that the ordinary rules of procedure had been complemented by instinct in a way that produced a just outcome. Whispered softly to Emma, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You helped, honey. You really did, thank you." Emma's tiny hand patted her mother, gently, serene and unaffected by the magnitude of the courtroom's reaction. For Emma, the act of pointing and speaking the two words "not him" was a natural response to her observation, devoid of ego or calculation. And yet those two words had changed lives, shifted perceptions, and ensured that an innocent man walked free. The gallery was abuzz, spectators whispering and exchanging glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Reporters typed rapidly, capturing the improbable chain of events. A toddler's intuition, a police dog's trained detection, and the subsequent reevaluation of evidence that culminated in acquittal. The courtroom had witnessed the convergence of innocence and precision, and the story was destined to become legendary, not merely for the verdict, but for the way justice had been illuminated by the smallest voice in the room. Daniel Reed, rising slowly, faced the jury with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. I don't have words," he said, voice trembling slightly. "I am thankful for your diligence and for those who helped reveal the truth." His gaze flicked briefly toward Emma and her mother, recognition dawning that their presence had been pivotal in a moment of extraordinary clarity. The courtroom watched quietly, a shared sense of relief and wonder washing over every adult present. Judge tapped the gavel once more, restoring order. "The verdict is recorded. The defendant, Daniel Reed, is hereby acquitted of all charges. Court is adjourned." The gavel's sound seemed to echo more profoundly than usual, a punctuation mark on a case that had expectation. Lawyers exchanged nods of respect, officers relaxed slightly, and the gallery began to stir, whispers of astonishment rippling through the room. Justice had been served, and yet it had been achieved in a way no one had anticipated. Outside the courtroom, sunlight poured through the courthouse windows, illuminating polished floors and casting long shadows across the steps. Daniel Reed stepped forward with his attorney, breathless with relief, and paused to glance back. Emma, perched on her mother's lap, had become a quiet hero, her small presence an anchor of clarity in a storm of human uncertainty. The dog, calm and disciplined, sat at Sergeant Daniel's side, the embodiment of trained precision that had silently guided attention toward truth. Reporters surrounded the trio, eager to capture reactions, to record statements, to immortalize a case in which innocence had been preserved by an improbable combination of instinct and expertise. "It was amazing," one reporter whispered to a colleague. "A child and a dog, who could have imagined it?" Others nodded, scribbling notes and murmuring to themselves about the extraordinary nature of the events they had just witnessed. Gathered Emma close, holding her daughter tightly. "You were amazing, honey," she whispered again, feeling the warmth of relief and pride mingling in her chest. Emma rested her small head against her mother's shoulder, calm, serene, and unaware that her words had become a force for truth and justice. The ordinary courthouse steps had transformed into a stage for extraordinary clarity, and every adult present would remember the quiet power of a child's observation for the rest of their lives. Daniel Reed stepped aside to thank Sergeant Daniels and Rex, acknowledging the subtle but crucial role they had played in bringing clarity to the case. The dog remained poised, calm, as if understanding the importance of its own presence without the need for celebration. Human intuition and trained precision had converged to reveal truth, and the courtroom, once tense and uncertain, now basked in the quiet relief of justice finally realized. As the crowd dispersed, whispers of astonishment and admiration followed, the story already spreading beyond the courthouse walls. Emma, small and calm, had transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. Her simple words, "not him," had pierced doubt, illuminated error, and ensured that the innocent were protected. In that courtroom, The boundaries between instinct, observation, and reason had blurred, creating a moment that would be remembered not for legal procedure alone, but for the subtle power of a child's insight. And so, as the sun climbed higher and the courthouse emptied, the extraordinary truth remained. Justice had been served not by the force of argument alone, nor by the weight of authority, but through the quiet, instinctive clarity of a child and the trained precision of a loyal police dog. Two small forces, working in tandem, had shifted the course of lives and reminded every adult present that truth sometimes emerges in the most unexpected of forms. The courthouse, now emptied of most spectators, seemed quieter than usual, yet the energy lingered like a pulse in the polished wood and high ceilings. Daniel Reed walked slowly down the steps, shoulders relaxed for the first time in months, his gaze lifting toward the bright morning sun. The warmth of freedom was a tangible weight on his chest, replacing the suffocating tension that had followed him through weeks of accusation. Reporters hovered nearby, scribbling notes and recording statements, but Daniel only had eyes for the little girl who had, without understanding, changed everything. Emma, perched on her mother's lap, was calm and serene, as if the events of the courtroom had been nothing more than a normal day. Yet her small voice had carried the weight of truth, her observation had corrected human error, and her focus had guided a trained police dog in revealing critical evidence. Held her daughter tightly, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "You did something amazing, honey," she whispered. "You helped save someone who didn't deserve this." Emma blinked slowly, her expression calm, and patted her mother gently, unaware of the extraordinary impact of her simple words. Not him. Sergeant Daniels knelt beside Rex, scratching behind the dog's ears with quiet pride. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice filled with respect. Rex sat patiently, alert yet composed, as if sensing that his role in the extraordinary events had concluded. The dog's trained precision had paired seamlessly with the child's instinctive observation, creating a synergy that no adult had anticipated. It was a lesson in humility for everyone present. Even experience and expertise could be guided by instinct, innocence, and subtle perception. Outside the courthouse, the media buzzed with excitement, eager to share the story of a toddler whose calm focus had shifted the course of justice. Reporters spoke in hushed, almost reverent tones, describing the remarkable convergence of events. "A child's intuition and a police dog's training," one reporter said, "combined to reveal the truth and prevent a miscarriage of justice. It's a story of instinct, courage, and the extraordinary in the ordinary." The word spread quickly, capturing public imagination far beyond the small courtroom that had hosted this incredible drama. Daniel Reed approached Emma and her mother, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and awe. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion. "If it weren't for your daughter, for her observation, I don't know what might have happened." Smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "She just noticed something," she said softly. "It's incredible how a little person can see what adults miss." Daniel nodded, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief, admiration, and humility. As the crowd began to disperse, lawyers and officers lingered to exchange reflections. Thomas, the defense attorney, spoke quietly to his colleagues. "This case will be studied for years," he said. "It's rare to see such a direct interaction between human intuition and trained expertise, especially from someone so young. It's a reminder that truth is sometimes revealed in the smallest voices." Rachel Morales, the prosecution, nodded, acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the events. "We must remember," she said carefully, "that evidence, observation, and instinct can converge in ways that are not always predictable. Justice, in this case, was guided by something extraordinary." The jurors left with a quiet sense of awe, aware that their deliberation had been influenced not just by evidence, but by a subtle, intuitive signal from a child and the trained reaction of a dog. They understood that their understanding of observation, reliability, and truth had expanded. A 3-year-old had taught them a lesson in clarity, patience, and the humility required to reassess what adults often take for granted. In this way, the trial had not only resolved the immediate question of guilt or innocence, but had also left an indelible impression on those entrusted with judgment. In the days following the trial, the story spread widely, capturing national attention. Media outlets hailed Emma as a toddler hero, celebrating the combination of childlike perception and canine expertise that had prevented an injustice. Daniel Reed returned to his home quietly, grateful for the reprieve and deeply reflective about the fragility of human judgment. He found solace in ordinary routines, yet the memory of the courtroom, the dog, and the child's clarity lingered. It was a humbling reminder of the layers of truth hidden beneath assumptions, appearances, and human error. And Emma returned to their daily lives, though the extraordinary experience had left its mark. Emma's natural curiosity seemed heightened, her attention to detail sharper than before, often marveled at her daughter's intuitive understanding of the world, recognizing that children perceive truths in ways adults rarely anticipate. "She just notices things," said one evening, reflecting quietly. "She notices what matters, even when no one else does." Emma's calm presence had shifted the course of an entire trial, and now, in quiet ways, it continued to shape the perception of everyone who knew the story. Sergeant Daniels and Rex returned to routine duty, yet their experience in the courtroom became a touchstone for training, reflection, and anecdotal guidance. Other officers and trainers studied the case, recognizing the subtle power of instinct, observation, and focus. Rex's calm, disciplined reaction to Emma's cues became a model for the integration of human intuition and canine skill in investigative procedures. The case would be cited as a precedent not in legal statutes alone, but in discussions of perception, instinct, and the extraordinary influence of the smallest, most observant participants. The extraordinary events also prompted broader reflection in the legal community. Judges, lawyers, and investigators discussed the role of intuition, observation, and non-traditional evidence in courtroom proceedings. While procedural rules remained paramount, the story of Emma and Rex illustrated the need for flexibility, humility, and openness to the unexpected. A 3-year-old's observation had shifted assumptions, altered witness recollections, and guided a trained dog to highlight critical evidence. The lesson was clear: truth is multifaceted, and the smallest voices may reveal it most profoundly. Months later, Daniel Reed had resumed his life with cautious optimism. The trial's resolution allowed him to rebuild relationships, restore trust, and reflect on the fragility of human judgment. Yet he remained ever mindful of the extraordinary forces that had shaped his fate. Emma's observation had not only preserved his freedom, but also illuminated the layers of assumption, error, and perception that underpin human decision-making. Her small voice had altered the trajectory of events in a way no adult could have anticipated or replicated. Emma, for her part, continued to grow, her natural curiosity and attention to detail quietly remarkable, encouraged exploration and observation, recognizing that her daughter's early insight was part of a larger, intuitive intelligence that would shape her understanding of the world. "Pay attention," would often say, smiling. "Sometimes noticing small things makes the biggest difference." Emma's simple statement, "Not him," remained a testament to the quiet, transformative power of perception, courage, and focus, even in the smallest of humans. As the sun set over the city, the courthouse steps were empty, yet the echoes of the extraordinary events lingered. Justice had been served, not merely through argument and procedure, but through the convergence of instinct, observation, and disciplined skill. A 3-year-old and a police dog had illuminated the truth, guiding everyone present toward clarity and fairness. The story would be remembered, retold, and studied, an enduring reminder that even the smallest voices can reshape lives, correct errors, and restore balance. And so, life returned to its ordinary rhythms, but the lesson endured. Daniel Reed walked free, grateful and reflective, and Emma returned home, serene and quietly proud. Sergeant Daniels and Rex resumed their duties, their bond strengthened by a shared moment of extraordinary purpose. The legal system, forever touched by this improbable confluence, gained a renewed appreciation for the subtleties of observation and the power of instinct. Two words spoken simply and calmly had transformed the lives of many, leaving a lasting imprint of hope, justice, and the extraordinary potential found in the most unexpected places. In the end, the story was not just about a trial, a child, or a dog. It was about clarity, perception, and the unexpected ways truth can reveal itself. Emma's quiet observation, the dog's trained precision, and the adult's willingness to listen had converged to create justice in its most extraordinary, human, and profoundly moving form.